Hi, and welcome to Global Student Voices, the podcast that brings you exciting stories and invaluable insights from students, educators, and thought leaders around the world. I'm your host, Coach Martin, with 30 years of experience in international education. Join us each time when we navigate the exciting journey between international secondary school and university. Let's get started. I am so excited. I'm Coach Martin, and I'm excited to have Aaron Basko on today. I'm going to let Aaron introduce himself, but before he does that, I just want to say that it's a pleasure to have you on the show. This is what I want this show to be about, is sharing good information, good resources with parents, students, and school officials at international schools around the world. And so I believe you are one of those great resources, and so I'm excited to share you with my people. So, Aaron, tell me just a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself for people who maybe haven't heard of you yet.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. So I am an educator, an author, and a speaker. Do a little bit of consulting too, but I've been in the higher education world for, I think this is my 26th year. I've worked at 5 different colleges and universities, mostly focused on the enrollment space, working with helping students get to college, helping to figure out some of their financial aid pieces. But I've done a lot of work also in career services and guiding students to great futures. I think for me, that's really the focus, right? Is kind of working with people to help them kind of understand and see who they are and imagine who they could really become. That's a big deal to me. That's sort of my purpose statement that I work with. And so again, senior leader here at currently at University of Lynchburg. And but I love to write as well. I've done a lot of work writing for audiences in the education space. I have a book recently out on find your purpose, manage your career for folks who are looking to make career changes. And then I just recently published a book more aimed at an international audience, which is called How to Impress U.S. Universities. So very excited to be here. And thanks, Coach Martin, for having me on the program.
Yeah, this is great. And your most recent release is what captured my attention, because I think every person listening to this podcast, if our podcast got to the people who it was intended for, then every one of them is going to want to pick up a copy of your book, because I think it's if they're looking at the U.S. as one of their possible destinations, then that becomes really the issue. It's not about you want to put your best foot forward. It's not about trying to trick the university into letting you in. You want to find a good fit, and then you want to build this relationship, um, and 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 you need to know something about your audience, right? And so I think what you've done here is do that kind of insider's perspective on that I think is really great. Are there like some nuggets, that teasers you want to share with folks? Just some
Sure.
things that you can share, let folks know what they should be looking for when they pick up a copy of your book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So first of all, I'm passionate about international mobility for students. I was an exchange student myself many years ago. I was a Fulbright scholar. I love languages, all those kinds of things that really drew me to figuring out how to help students do this. And I've worked with international students for many years, and I just found that they really did not have a very good sense of how universities operate. What are we looking for? What are we hoping for in students? And so really what I tried to do with this book was to kind of peel back the hood a little bit and say, how do universities see you as a candidate, right? What are they looking for? So a lot of the tips are things like how to create a very consistent story about yourself as you are pushing that forward, right? So that all the pieces of your application match. How to take advantage of opportunities like interviewing or connecting and managing your communication with admissions offices. What are they worried about when they consider you as an applicant, right? So that you
Yeah.
can understand kind of how to put their fears to rest, because they're all going to have, they're going to see you as a potential risk in some ways. And if you can help them understand how to mitigate that risk, you're going to be a great, strong applicant. So it's really a how-to for students to say, here's how universities see you. Here's how you can influence that in a way that's going to make you a really strong candidate.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think you and I are kind of seeing the same issue for students. The what I've written kind of addresses the same thing. You're making sure you understand the target so that you have a chance of your arrow hitting, as opposed to just kind of random scatter shot and hope for the best, which is just an uncomfortable feeling. and
Absolutely.
it doesn't have to be that way. Like it's not that complicated.
No, absolutely. So much of it, I think, is about understanding the system, right? And understanding, especially students who are not as familiar, don't have as much experience with the U.S. Higher education system, understanding the nuances between the types of schools and what they look for and what their values are, and how to really be able to put yourself into that, into that place and talk about yourself as somebody who's going to be able to contribute to the community of the university. I mean, just understanding all those nuggets. It's also really fun because in this book, it isn't just my thoughts, although that's sort of the baseline, but I reached out to international educators from all around the world, from Education USA centers, from people in consulting organizations, from people here at multiple great high-end universities, and said, what would you say to students who are looking to come and study in the U.S.? What advice would you give them? So, you're getting advice from people from Yale and the University of Iowa and the education regional coordinators for the Middle East and all kinds of stuff to help you make sure you're getting good advice.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really unique and really special about it, is you do get to hear those extra voices, and it all kind of gels and coincides with each other. And I think it's absolutely, well, it's perfect, and not to be saying like perfect as in there and there's nothing that could be better, but just in terms of hitting the mark and letting students kind of, yeah, I mean, a hand delivering something
Yeah.
that those of us who've been coaching and consulting with families for a long time have been trying to articulate. And now I will be using your book as a
Oh,
handbook when I'm working with students, um, as a way. And also, I'm totally cheating. I am going through the contributors to your book, and I'm inviting them on the podcast too, because I think they
excellent.
have great voices, and what they shared with you I think is great. And I love kind of tying all those pieces together. um, as in addition to kind of observing that there was this missing data set for international students as they were applying, um, have you made other observations about kind of the collective? I understand that every international student is completely unique and completely have their own story, but are there kind of some shared experiences that you've observed from your point of view, from your how you look at the landscape?
Absolutely. I mean, I think for a student, it's almost impossible for them not to, look at U.S. higher education through the lens of the education system that they're used to, right? And maybe project on it some things that may or may not be true. So, for example, so many countries, they get very, very specific. They get very targeted in their educational systems. And so when students come to the United States and they suddenly have general education requirements to fulfill, they're like, what is this? This has nothing to do with my major, right? And they don't understand why that's valuable. And so I think it's really important for universities to make the case for why this type of education really, really works for students, right? And I think the same is true for the relationship that students and faculty sometimes have at U.S. universities, which can oftentimes be very different. It can be more collaborative, it can be more interactive, right, than maybe what students are used to. So there are all these ways that it's easy to just misinterpret the differences. I think obviously the other piece is that from a distance, most students only know a handful of names of colleges and universities, right?
Right.
Some very highly ranked places, of course, which they're going to know, but they don't realize that, in contrast to maybe some other places, the U.S. has thousands of good universities, right? And so finding a place that values you just as much as you value that place is really important, right? You can, try to barely get into one of these places that you've heard of, and they will treat you like whoever, right? And it won't matter. Or you can go and be a really big fish and a little bit of a star at a place that's a little less known, but they're going to give you all of the opportunities to do great research, to work with faculty, again, to be that kind of big fish in that community, which is an experience that I don't think a lot of students are used to or foresee for themselves moving forward.
Yeah, I think a lot of students are thinking about these big universities, big classrooms, not wanting to disappear in the crowd, or maybe wanting to disappear in the crowd, depending on their perspective. Um, and the 10 years I was at a university, it was a smaller school, and the international students that came were superstars,
Yeah.
and we helped create that environment where they could just elevate and be the commencement speaker and run for student body president and do all the things that at a larger institution, maybe they would have to do more convincing. Whereas this, they could just let their personality and talent shine through, and there was a, a more open platform
Yeah.
for that expression. And I've had students that recorded their first album at a small college because they connected with somebody in the music recording department, and then they found out that, hey, I can just go sit in on recording. Oh, they'll help me produce, and like all these kind of things that you would never even imagine, and were not part of their business degree that they were pursuing. They were, but
Yeah.
that
You
broader education opened up a lot of doors.
it's amazing how you can be a really multifaceted person at the right places in the United States, right? At the right universities. I mean, I see this all the time with students who want to play sports, right? And they're coming from a place where in their home country, they either have to study or they have to choose to be part of a club to follow their sport. They come to the U.S., they can do their sport at the same time. The practice field is, 500 yards away from their dining hall, from the residence hall, and they have all this extra time. And suddenly, because they're not, driving for an hour each way to their club, suddenly they are the class president. They're doing music, they're doing soccer, they're doing, 3 or 4 different clubs and activities that they maybe never imagined. And they find themselves as these really well-rounded people that come out of this kind of education. They grow so much while they're here because they're not just, oh, you're just a student, you're just a peg kind of, in this academic area, right? So it really changes things for students.
Yeah, it kind of touches on something, and I know this isn't necessarily your specific um, niche, but talk to me a little bit about, because I'm having students come through, talking to students who've really gotten a lot of pleasure out of playing sports, but think of sports as like, you know Big Ten football, and or that's like this super elite. I'm never going to play in college, so they quit playing in high school because they're never going to play in college. And my experience has been of student athletes that come to university, smaller schools a lot of times, non-scholarship, or smaller scholarship, and are able to continue to develop their skills in their sport. But it adds something else. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about what you've observed in that sense?
Absolutely. I think this happens all the time as I'm talking to international students, right? I think, again, because in many places in their home country, right, in order for them to get a leg up or to get noticed, they have to rely on that athletic piece, right? So they feel like that's their ticket, right? And then they come to the US and they realize that they don't need that to be their ticket, right? Yeah, they can guide with that, but U.S. institutions are really interested in students with multiple, talents, right? So we want great students that also play sports, that also do interesting things, that also, do service or leadership or whatever else. And so a lot of students come and they're like, oh, I need to get a sports scholarship. I need to get a sports scholarship. And I'm always saying, no, you don't. We can give you a different kind of scholarship, right? I mean, based on where you're coming from, or based on your academics, or based on the fact that you're just a great match with the institution. We're happy to give you a scholarship, even though, we don't offer a specific sports scholarship. But there's so many levels here, right? You can come as a student who is just totally committed to trying to play in the most competitive level possible, or you can come as a student who just loves to play every day, and we can plug you into an amazing club sport. We can, if you're somebody who's just casual, we can, give you the opportunity to be on an intramural team, and you can do it like on 3 different sports, right? You can say, well, I never tried volleyball, but that sounds like a lot of fun. Like, let me do that, right? So it's just a really different piece. Again, I think we have students often find that they have to be in one box or the other, and that's not the case. You can come here and be a whole person.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and often missed.
Yeah,
Um, and really, I think one of the great added values. I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of universities and a whole bunch, thousands of great ones around the world, because there's so many different people and different students.
yeah,
Um, and I think the reason that, and I know that students ask me and parents are like, why are there so many colleges in the U.S.? And I think this emphasis and this cultural identity that we have of developing the whole person and advancing the whole person and doing it in a community of learners. Of course, you can take classes online and learn some stuff, but it's different than than joining a community of learners. Can you tell me a little bit kind of your experience with that and how you see international students plugging into that community.
Absolutely. I think that's, completely true, right? I think in so many parts of the world, the higher education system is more like a factory, right? It's you get on the conveyor belt, they tell you exactly what it is you're supposed to do. You just put up with it and you do what they tell you to do, and then you come out the other side, right? It's very factory oriented. And, as I talk a lot about this in the book, and, how to impress U.S. universities, I talk about the fact that you here are you're an active force in designing your own experience in college, right? At university, right? You come here, and instead of being in classrooms of 500 students, you might be in a classroom of 18 students, right? You might know your faculty member and use their first name. You might have dinner at your faculty member's house, right? I mean, these are things that people just don't expect from that. And that's part of why there are so many, right? Is because it's smaller, it's more personalized, and because here at a place like University of Lynchburg, we're not saying like, here's your curriculum, follow it. You have no choices, right? We're saying, what is it that you want to do with your life? Okay, great. How can we come alongside you and help you to figure out how to do that, how to get there? What kind of internship does that mean for you? Who do you need to network with here on our campus? Who do you need to network in our alumni group, right? So it's this sense of you being an active agent in your own education, you tailoring it to the degree that you want to in order to go on a particular path that just doesn't exist in most other countries, right? There where it's just like, okay, you've signed up for this, you are one of, 5,000 students, and good luck. If you make it, you make it, right? Here, because of that, the supply and demand is different. You have that opportunity to really craft your own education in a very specific way.
Hey there, GSV listeners. Before we dive back into our conversation, I wanted to take a moment to thank our incredible guests, the students, school officials, and thought leaders who inspire us with their stories and insights. As you're listening today, be thinking of ways that you can support the guests of this show. There are links in the descriptions with just some of the ways. I'm Coach Martin, your host and your partner in navigating the university journey. Whether you're exploring university options, preparing for admissions, or seeking support during your academic path, my books provide practical guidance and insights to empower your university success. Join me in individual coaching, group sessions, or courses designed to equip you for university life and beyond.
I am from Brazil, but I attended an American school in Indonesia for my secondary education. So my situation was really confusing and really scary. Coach Martin really understands global students, and he loves helping us out.
Again, thank you for listening. Explore the podcast description for links and resources and contacts discussed in today's episode. Visit www.theglobalstudentsolutions.com to learn more and embark on your journey toward university success. Now, let's return to our conversation. Yeah, and I think that's a huge advantage and one that is often overlooked. And I've talked to students who aren't even thinking about that when they're looking at colleges. They're looking at school ranking, and they're looking at, a bunch of other really interesting diagnostic tools. But what about you? And where do you fit in? And I think for me, when I'm working with students, that's the key piece, is know who you are, know what you have to offer, know where your skills and talents and strengths lie, and then look for a partner in creating, continue to build on your foundation into the future you. I think that's really, it's good to hear it from people still in higher education, because I've been out for a while and I'm like, I think you still think like this. I think these are still the good thoughts that are happening there.
It's definitely true. It's interesting when I was trying to pick a title for the book, right? So it's called How to Impress U.S. Universities, right? Which I think, it to some degree could feed into that idea of, oh, well, it's all about like, I just need to get into wherever is the best possible. So I did have a concern about that, because I really wanted students to realize that, here in the U.S., it's about finding a good match, right? So just because you can get in someplace doesn't mean that's where you should go. Sometimes it's funny, I compare it sometimes with the dating scene, at least in the U.S., right? Is that this is not about like, okay, can you get the prettiest girl to go with you to the dance? If she's not interested in you, then there's really no point, right? You might have a very pretty date to the dance, but then she never talks to you again, right? So you want to have this kind of relationship where the institution finds you to be a great match and a valuable contributing member, and and you find the institution to be a great partner in shaping your education. So in some ways, even though the book talks about impressing, it's less about impressing and more about, again, making that match and saying, um, you know, here's who I am, here are my values, where am I going to find a place that has those same values, because they are going to give me more opportunities, they are going to see that value in me and want to develop the potential that they see in me to do that.
Yeah. Now you've worked at a couple, and it kind of leads me to this other thought that just kind of popped in my head. Because you've worked at a couple of different institutions. Can you describe, from your perspective, this idea that all these universities have their own personality, have their own set of values and characteristics, and can you help me understand how schools different, and then also how a student can figure that out about a university?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've worked at, like I said, 5 different places, and a broad variety, a small religious institution, a high-end liberal arts college, a public regional, a single gender institution. I mean, just lots of different things, right? And what you see is that they come with different missions. And if you look historically at their missions, you'll get a little bit better sense of that. It's really interesting. I think a lot of people outside the US don't realize that really institutions all came from one of two places, right? Most institutions in the country were founded at some point based on some kind of religious mission, right? They were connected with a church. Even Harvard, Yale, all the places you've heard about, they started out as places to train clergy, right? So most people don't know that. So you either have a school that has that in their historical background, or you have a school that was just founded as a state institution right off the bat, right? And so right from the beginning, they have different missions, right? And so, for example, some institutions are really focused on serving students in their local geographic area. Some are really focused on, a particular area like entrepreneurship or the health sciences or something like that. That they're missional focused in terms of their majors, right, in their programs. Others have this again sort of historical bent where they are like, we're really all about service, or we are really all about developing the whole person, or they're just. And I think if you look at their mission statements a little bit, you look a little bit at their history, you're going to get a flavor for why these institutions feel different, act different, right? They're just not the same. And so that's why you see, even in the rankings, there are all these categories of institutions that are still imperfect, but at least it's not one big long list, right? And you're not comparing a school with 40,000 people that it's a state research institution with a small liberal arts college that was really founded to create teachers and nurses, right? So so it's fascinating. There's a whole history in that. So
yeah, which is super interesting to us academic nerds, but probably
not
for
the students
most
so
students
much.
and families, they're just like, so what does that have to do with me? How do
Right.
I figure this out? And it is a lot like dating. I've used the same analogy a lot. You need to get to know them. You need to share who you are, be authentic and real, and you're not trying to pull anything over on the school to try to get in. You're trying to share authentically who you are, because then that's what's going to get you that good fit where you're going to really thrive. And that's what I try to do as a consultant, what most of the people I know in higher education are trying to do in higher education. And I don't know, somewhere along the line those pieces don't always connect, and that's why I do shows like this, so we can help people see the connection. And actually, I really love the title of your book because of what you do in it, because I think people will pick it up and start to read it because of the title and what it triggers in their brain. And then you do what great educators do, and you help them learn something they didn't know about themselves and about higher education as they go through the book.
And that was really the lesson that I wanted to get across, right? Is that if you really want to impress great universities, know yourself, right?
Yeah.
Know what you're great at, know what you're not great at, know what you want, know what your values are, and then know them and know what their values are and look for that great match, right? I mean, that's how you impress them, is not by, just having great scores, but by saying, hey, I understand your mission and your values are aligned with my values, and I'm going to be a great fit for you because I'm going to help you push your values forward into the world.
Yeah. From a school side of thing, and I don't know if it just addresses like the skeptic in students, or it's my own, but it's one of the things that I learned when I was working at the university is in admissions, we were often trying to figure out or guess sometimes, hypothesize based on the information that the students shared with us on whether or not they would persist, whether or not this is somebody who would be successful in our institution where where that partnership was appealing to us. Tell us kind of the motivation that schools have on finding the right fit.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think that's a big part of it, right? They're looking and they're saying, it's to everybody's disadvantage for the student to come for a semester or two and then drop out, right? It doesn't help the student, doesn't help the institution. It's bad for the family. It's bad for international relations, right? Depending on how big you want to look at it, it's just not good. So you want students who are a good fit and are going to stay. And part of that, like part of what I talk about throughout the book is like understanding like what your risk factor is, right? So if you indicate in your essay and the way you talk about things that you don't understand what kind of university this is, they're going to say, ooh, that's a red flag. That's a risk. This student might get here, decide this is not what they want, and might try to transfer somewhere else, right? Or, for example, if you have a really hard time getting your financial paperwork together, right? They're going to say, ooh, that's a retention risk, right? Maybe they have enough funding to fund themselves for year one, but are they really going to be able to do this in subsequent years, right? Or are they going to not be able to persist? And so I think, they're looking at all of those factors, and the academic thing the same way, right? They're saying, okay, you're telling us you want this major, but when we look at your grades, those aren't your strongest grades. And they're going to say they're going to, try to get into this program, and then they won't persist because they're really not in the right thing. So I think that's a lot of ways, again, how you're impressing the universities is you're saying, no, I understand my strengths and I understand what you need from me, right? I can tell you what I know about you as an institution and why I'm going to be a great fit, and I understand your mission. I can share with you like assurances that I'm going to be able to pay for this over the long term, assurances that I know myself well enough to know my academic strengths and where to use those. So those are all areas where, colleges really care about that persistence. Our reputation is based on the reputation of the students that we graduate, right? Not the students that we bring in only, but the students that actually leave and are very successful. And so it's super in our interest to say, we want to find students who are going to thrive here and go out in the world and make a good name for us.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I'll probably be stealing that soundbite to promote this podcast. I think that's brilliant, and I think if people only take away the one thing from today, I hope that's something they take away. Any advice for the international schools or the schools that are producing students that are wanting to study abroad? What's a nugget of wisdom that you can give those schools and how they can best prepare their students for thriving at university and beyond?
Yeah, I think, international schools have they're an interesting place because I think a lot of times they get sort of left out of the picture in some ways, right? So institutions are looking and they're saying, okay, we know how our domestic schools work, right? Or maybe we work with a recruitment agency or something like that. So somebody else does the work, but they often don't have really a plan for international schools. So I think the more that the international school can help the university to understand who they are and what their educational philosophy is, I think that's great. And the more they can help the university understand like this is what my students are looking for, right? And hoping for. Because I think institutions do want to make partnerships. I mean, we certainly do. We actually have an initiative going on right now where we are reaching out to international schools. We're trying to make connections with the IB folks, and we're saying, tell us, we love global citizens, right? We want global citizens. We want some pure international students for whom this is like, really, really exotic. But we also want some sort of students in the middle who have an understanding of the way that the educational system works in the U.S., who maybe have that as part of their background, or they're citizens, but they've lived in another country. We feel like those students are the perfect ambassadors for us, right? In between our purely domestic and our purely international students. But I feel like sometimes it's a little hard for us to reach out and understand the differences between the schools, what they're looking for, what they're hoping for, how to get people's attention. And we know that they are very popular depending on their location, right? If you're in a popular location and you're in an international school, you're going to get bombarded by everybody who gets there. So what really matters to you, right? Tell us, like, do you not want us to bombard you, right? Do you not want us to all come at the same time? Do you, what is not effective and what really is effective for your students, right? And I think the other thing that can really, really help is I feel like with international schools, student to student contact is super helpful, right? It's one thing for international schools for their students to talk to me, wearing my tie and that kind of thing. It's another thing completely different for them to talk to a student who has come internationally, been on our campus, and then can go back and talk to the student and say, hey, I made this kind of a transition. You can make this transition. This is why this is a great place to be. Here's my number on WhatsApp. Let's talk, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think sometimes the very best thing that an international school can do who doesn't have, smaller international schools that don't have, well, you couldn't possibly have a relationship with 5,000 schools in the U.S., right? I mean, it's not possible. You can't maintain it. So if you don't have those relationships, at least giving students the right tools to share about their academic journey, to recognize that, I did some education of the school that I attended for college about the international school I went to say, look, I know I was middle of my class, but you need to understand that 100% of my class attended college, and the 80th person in my class, got into Harvard, right? Like we're different. We're a different breed. And yes, my math scores are low, but those are in calculus, which all my friends took. So it's just different.
I think that's where those personal relationships are really important, right? We've tried to recognize, for example, from our side of things that just like, an international school can't be an expert in 5,000 colleges, I can't be an expert in 5,000 international schools, right? Or however many there are. And so for me, it's more important to make that connection. And I always tell our partners, I'm like, look, you tell me who is a good match for the institution, right? I'm going to believe you because you know your students so much better than I do. So why would I try to second guess your recommendation on somebody? Let me give you the information about who we are and who we're looking for. And then you recommend to me who you think is a really good fit. And your recommendation is going to be the most important thing I look at because you know that student, right? I'm looking for a needle in a haystack and you know the haystack, right? So,
that's perfect.
I really feel like having that kind of a relationship where an independent counselor could call me up and just say, hey, I'm about to send you a student. They're going to love it there. Right. They're going to be a great fit. I'm just going to say, terrific. You know my profile. You know what I'm looking for. If you're saying this student is a match for me, we're going to take it. Right. So I think that is a really unique opportunity that I could work together with people in that way. And it's just an exciting way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I hate to do this. I just checked the clock and time goes when you're having great conversations.
Absolutely.
We probably going to need to do this again. And
right.
We'll let you get into your new role at the university, and then we'll touch base again maybe this fall or in the spring, and see how things have gone and what new insights you may have to share with international students. I will post in the description some information about ways that you can get in touch with you, and certainly the links to how to get your book. I'll just say this in case somebody's listening: if you're at an international school and you have a library, which you're due, and you don't have this book in it, which you don't because it just came out, you need to get it ordered right away because shipping takes a little time to some international schools. And you need it on the shelf for students so they can have this tool in their toolbox. Thanks again. I really, really appreciate you being on the show and sharing this good word for international students and I think some real good wisdom for schools and parents and students alike. So thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into Global Student Voices. We're committed to bringing you the best advice and to share stories from global students and educators. We need your help. Make sure you subscribe, share, rate, and review our podcast. Follow us on social media for more updates, and we'll see you next time. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.